Yeah, would I move amendments 3, 4 and 5?
3 for now, but we can get to 4 and 5 when you do them. But they must be discussed together, but you'll move 4 and 5 when we've dealt with 3.
So if I'm discussing them, I better discuss them.
You can discuss them all together now.
All right, thank you. I've resubmitted Amendment 3, which removes the selling of a property for the purposes of ending a tenancy. In the context of the current rental crisis, we've seen prospective landlords purchase houses for the purposes of buy-to-let properties, where they've no intention of living in the house but see it as an investment opportunity that has a return in terms of rent and perhaps in terms of sale later on. The difficulty here arises when the new owners of the property seek to end an ongoing tenancy as new owners, and under the 2004 Act they're permitted to do so. Many of those outside rent pressure zones, rent pressure zone areas, or those seeking to evade rent pressure zone obligations seek to do this so that they can inflate rents substantially from what they were seeing greater return on the investment. However, for the tenants in situ, it ensures eviction without reasonable cause or fairness. It ensures that under the current market, many families who have built a life and for all intended purposes are good tenants find themselves re-entering a market where rental options in that locality is limited and probably at an inflated price to what they were already paying. It's not only families but many students and young professionals who aren't typically of great means. For example, a couple I know renting in a shared Dublin City apartment were recently given notice to quit for the purpose of sale of the property. They were paying $750 a month for a double room. 2 months later they found a property that would accept them and are now paying $12.50 a month for a room in an apartment 50 metres away from their original letting. They may have found cheaper options, but in reality time was against them, as they had less than 2 months to uproot their lives and go into a market of two-tier rents. These are the people who found themselves now being told that co-living spaces, by you, Minister, co-living spaces in the press today, at $1,300 per month are now a viable option for them. So-called co-living is not a solution to the rental crisis. It's a step, as Sinn Féin see it, on the road to future tenements. The Minister's comments about young people having to make sacrifices in terms of rental accommodation are frankly bizarre. The Minister also referred to the awkward situation where a young couple buy a rent-to-buy property and must evict current tenants. While it's not a nice situation for anyone involved, the awkwardness of this situation is not sufficient that we should not allow for leniency for the tenants that are in situ. The consequences of evicting tenants, making them vulnerable to homelessness or condemning them to inflated rents, far and above outweighs the consequences for the buyers here. While we discussed this at committee stage, I remain unconvinced over the last week that this amendment isn't a legitimate call to make, and that it shouldn't, and that it should, I think, receive the support of government. The Minister has numerous times referred to the constitutionality of such an amendment. However, you've not really elaborated on this. While commercial properties, as I had mentioned, are typically different arrangements and longer leases, you still cannot use sale as a purpose of ending a tenancy. The consultation is not so prescriptive that it defines between the differences of commercial and residential, and without being furnished with any legitimate legal opinion to question the constitutionality, I will proceed with the amendment and press the amendment.
Okay, anyone else on Amendment 3, 4 or 5? Senator Humphreys?
I'm not done yet.
Sorry?
I'm not done.
Finished. You're not done? Okay, keep going.
Amendment 4 is related. It refers to removing the references to occupation of property owners' family members as the basis for a notice to quit. The Minister mentioned at committee stage that the purposes for its retention is so if a landlord has a family member who has fallen on hard times, they might be able to assist them with their property. I still don't agree with that, from having thought about it from the last debate that we had. I think it's insufficient to allow for what is currently the situation, what's a constant occurrence in the market as it stands. What we didn't discuss is that many make the decision not based on assisting a vulnerable family member, but to avail of tax incentives that having a family member in situ brings when renting other rooms, for example. In a 4-bedroom house where one room is occupied by a family member, the 3 remaining rooms would be far more profitable than had all 4 rooms been rented to non-family members due to the tax incentives for such a scenario. Landlords who end tenancies to do this far more prevalent is the situation as the Minister described. And I suspect that the RTB have made you aware of that. While no one has an issue with family members availing property, in this way the issue arises when the tenancy is ended for the landlord's financial benefit, as opposed to its natural end when a family member may move in. And then just finally in relation to Amendment 5, it extends notices to quit to 90 days for tenancies of 6 months or less. While the Minister was correct when he said that lease arrangements must be adhered to before a notice to quit is given, in instances where tenants are subject to a 6-month lease or a periodic tenancy, the landlord may end the tenancy at any time during the first 6 months without having to give a reason. When circumstances change or sometimes tenancies simply don't work out, 28 days for a family to find an alternative options is not good enough. It's unfair given the realities of the rental crisis at the moment and the lack of affordable options. If a family who have found accommodation in an area that's suitable to them, that they may be close to their children's school or extended family, and they find themselves with a notice to quit period and having to find another affordable option within the locality within 4 weeks, is just not reasonable. We discussed last week about how Daft.ie reported there were just 2,700 homes available to rent across the state on the 1st of May, which is the lowest since they've started recording their statistics in 2006. If that's filtered down by what may be local and affordable, the reality is just that options are often not readily available in 28 days. And this is a contributor to homelessness, and I don't believe it's something that's unreasonable to expect from landlords. I'm done now.
Thank you very much, Senator.